anyone like interested in it? I know that like when we've talked about it a lot, and I think I talk about it a lot just because I'm learning about it in grad school. But what is it to you guys? How do you sort of like think about it? And then like what questions do you have? I'll just kind of open it up and we can just chat.
Definitely interested in it. And the presentation was great last week. Yeah, I don't know what questions I have. I'm trying to think. Sorry, and also I have someone working on my computer right now because I am at work and it is freaking out.
No worries. Um, so basically with like mental skills training, that's everything from like visualization to self-talk to like building confidence, having like a mental game plan going into any event. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. And just like individualized run training, your mental skills training like is also going to be individualized. So it's not going to be cookie cutter, copy and paste from one to the next. It's going to be very like dependent on you and what your goals are and what your values are and how you see your values coming through in your performance or how you don't see your values coming through in performance but want to. And so we can kind of like work through a lot of that with goal setting and figuring out like what those process goals are, what those performance goals are, and then ultimately what the outcome goals we would like to see are. And then sort of once we have that, we can almost like backtrack and figure out where we need to start, what we absolutely need to like hit as landmarks along the way. Similar to like your periodized training with like an A race, sometimes there's like a couple B races, maybe a C race, that we can use as workouts and like adventure runs before like the big one. And so mental skills training is pretty similar to that. It's just different. Um,
Kristen, I realized I did not watch the recording of the presentation, and I'm kicking myself because I was really looking forward to doing that. But I did do the training with you. Was that really like similar in regards to the mental skills training?
a little bit. Neil had like specific examples that he walked us through and exercises that we all did like individually, you know, on the same call, which was really neat. Um, some of the stuff that we've done before has been has had a lot of focus around core values and goal setting, but mental skills training is kind of like bringing everything to the table to sort of figure out what works for you as an individual. So like what Natasha, like what works for you isn't going to necessarily work for Jacob or Andrew, and what works for Kaylin might not work for you, but it could also apply to Andrew. So it's like it's very nuanced in a lot of ways. In one way you can kind of figure out like what piece of it there's like, you know, I want I don't want to put like a specific number on it, but up to 15 different like topics within mental skills training. And so basically like if you're really interested in core values, we can dive into core values. Like I think you've all done the worksheet, kind of know what everyone's I know, yeah, I know what all of your core values are. Andrew's are on sticky notes because we're planning. It's like up on the wall in my room from our last call, Andrew. Um, but yeah, just it sort of depends like what your goals are. And some athletes that I coach like don't have races on the calendar. They just like to run and they just like having structure. So their goals and values are a little bit different. But then we can sort of pull that into like the visualization aspect of the actual races or the back-to-back long runs or like the stage races, which are like multi-day adventures. And so thinking about how you're going to feel on like day 4 of, you know, a back to back to back to back long run through the mountains, like, and being able to like mentally prepare for that and like plan for your future self. Like, what is future self going to want to eat? What are they going to need to hear? What are they going to need to be reminded of? Like, is a like when in doubt, play Beyonce like backup plan required? Things like that where you can sort of figure out what's going to be best for you at the time, and like a nutrition plan or any backup plan, like any um strategy, I guess. Like having backup plans is always a good idea as well. So
I actually have a question on that because I think I told you on my bike trip, I was definitely, although I was not running, I was definitely practicing everything else besides being on my feet. And one of them was the mental skills area. And I definitely utilized music when needed. And I I guess the runs that I have or the races I have done in the past, I think a lot of people will listen to music, but I don't know about if there's certain ultra runs where you don't, or it's recommended not to, or if that is something that I can use as a skill. Because for me, it definitely like music is, even outside of running, is number one my go-to, like lift my spirits. So I was kind of wondering if that would be a tool in my toolbox.
absolutely, absolutely. There are a few races where they recommend not listening to music, and like that's like any road marathon. Like you can,
Yeah.
the pros and the elites are not technically are allowed to. And then there's some, I can't remember, maybe there's a race in Colorado.
You can't on the Ascent or the Pikes Peak Marathon.
That's it. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Just because there's so much traffic and people are going
Mm.
in and around you,
Yeah.
you like step
And
off
I
the.
have these headphones that don't even go in my ears, so I would like to use those, but I'll double check on my race for it. But yeah, that was one thing I was wondering.
Yeah, I think the trail races where it's like really helpful. I mean, it could be any trail race really, but it's also like if you're doing a 50K, and you need it for like that second half or like that middle third, like being able to like have your music downloaded ahead of time and just like pop it in for 50-mile, 100K, 100 milers where you have crew and like maybe even pacers. Like it's good to tell your pacers and crew sort of like what's going to help at like what when you think the music will help and what exactly to play. Like share the playlist, build it together even, and then like you know make sure you know what their favorite songs are if you're crewing and pacing, but also like tell your crew and pace what those songs are and like what you need to hear. One thing that I did for the Black Canyon 100K was I sat down like with my coach and crew and like friends and stuff and just was like, okay, here's where I'm at mentally. This is what I need to see in order to consider the race a success. And these are the things that these are my process goals. So if you're pacing me, like help me set timers, just remind me in like whatever ways. But also it's important to like flip that as well. And like these are the things that could happen that would make me feel like maybe this race was not my best performance or was not a success in whatever parameters that could be, just so that you can like avoid it a little bit easier. Like you can see it, like if one thing happens, like you forget to eat a gel, then you're like, oh God, I can't keep doing that over and over, right? Like you have control over that. So making sure that you're okay with like letting a few things slide, but remembering to like stay in control of the controllables and just like letting go of what you can't control. Cause I think that sometimes we hyperfixate on the little things, and with ultra running and trail running, there's so many things that have to align to have a good day. And a lot of things don't, and you can still have a good day. So it's just like the mental preparation that you do going into the race helps so much when shit hits the fan. So it's why I always say, like, plan the perfect day and then prepare for the worst day. So, Caitlin, do you have a question?
I do, but everything that you were just saying, because and I'll have more questions in regards to everything like planning ahead. But then, like, I love what you said about with your crew, just being very transparent, being like, hey, I'm struggling right now. I need, like, this is where my mind is right now. So I'll have more questions on that. My question actually came up with Natasha talking about music. So I usually on 90, maybe 80% of my runs, I don't listen to music or podcast or anything. I kind of just like use it as I mean, I just like tuning into my body and like using it as like time to like think and stuff like that. So sometimes I'll find, and this is actually something I learned running with people, is like sometimes I have to be like, okay, we're not going to talk right now because I get like too overwhelmed, like with too much stimulation going on. That said, there are times like in races or even in like a long training run where music or like some kind of podcast or distraction probably could help. But then I also have the mindset where I'm like, that suffering mindset, like you got to be tough and be like, oh no, I shouldn't use distractions. I need to be able to like tune into my body and then like adjust and all that kind of stuff. So I wonder if that's like the right thing to do, or like if distractions can sometimes be okay.
Such a good question. And it's so funny. I feel like the answer is it depends. Like if the distraction is so big that you forget to eat a gel or drink or miss a turn, like then it's obviously like not great. But I do think that there is something to be said about like getting just like quieting the voices, right? Whether that's with music or an audiobook or a podcast or something. I think that's definitely a good way to like get into a rhythm and a flow and kind of just go into like robot mode. Which is something that I've heard Courtney Dauwalter talk about a lot, especially in context with her season last summer. She said that like at the end of the summer when she was doing UTMB, like she was just mentally drained, physically exhausted. And the thing that she kept saying to herself to quiet those voices that were distracting her, like, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. Oh no, there's an uphill. She just kept saying robot, 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 because she knew that her body knew what to do. Like it was muscle memory at that point. And so she was able to like keep the distractions at bay by doing that. And so like using mantras is one way that you can do that. But another way that I've learned that I think is really cool and I've tried it myself is that like doing almost like a running meditation. So like every mile, like if you're not listening to music, it's like, okay, for this mile, I'm going to like either, this is going to get really woo woo. But you could do anything from like a moving meditation of like loving kindness, right? So like one of the miles of Black Canyon, I was just thinking about like my 13-year-old nephew, like he got a mile, my niece got a mile, my other nephew got a mile. Like during the hardest sections of that, I just kept thinking about people who like I cared about, and like it became less about me in that moment in that race, like absorbing that pain and discomfort, and more about like pulling from memories that I had made with people in my life who like lift me up. And that really helped. Sometimes I do that with music too. Like my my 8-year-old niece is like the most fierce little female I have ever met in my life. She's terrifying in good and bad ways. But her favorite song is by Ed Sheeran. And so it's always like to the back end of my playlist. Like I know that if I'm having a hard time, I just like hit fast forward until I hit that song. And I'm like, okay, like Ellie says to never, ever, ever give up. And this song is going to remind me to do that. So like having things like that that can like, you can rely on, or even like they can surprise you when the song pops up, or if you think of something, those are good ways too. But I really like the question about distractions, because I think that some can be really good and then others can be pretty detrimental. But one thing that I really like about how you approach training, Caitlin, and like the physicality of it is that you're so in tune with your body, and being able to do like body scans and like lean in and like pay so close, like so much attention, I think is really important, and a good way to like, I don't know, like not get injured, not run too fast on an easy day. You know, like there's a lot of really great things that you're doing. and like sometimes I think that giving yourself the grace and compassion to just be in the moment and let distractions come if they do, but let them go at the same time. Just like in through one ear, out the other type of thing.
I appreciate that. That is funny that you mentioned that I'm very in tune with my body, because sometimes I feel like that's my detriment as well, where I'm like, oh no, what's this little niggle? What's gonna happen here? And like, and obviously I when those things come up, I try to remember, like I've heard a lot of probably Courtney, but like a lot of professionals who are like, yeah, it's not actually, Corinne Malcolm says it a lot too, is like, it's not gonna feel good all the time.
Mhm.
And that from like actual pros sometimes feels nice that like they feel niggles and stuff too. And that's just normal.
Yeah, it makes me feel less crazy when I'm like, oh, it's not easy for them. They just make it look really easy. Like it's uncomfortable for all of us. So, one example that I just thought of, especially with it being Hard Rock Week, was a few years ago. Killian dislocated his shoulder going up Handies, and was able to like finagle his Solomon vest into a sling and like ended up breaking his own record and like winning the whole thing. It was silly. But I was there spectating with a friend and we were talking about like, oh my God, like, wouldn't you just like panic? Like, wouldn't that be a big enough distraction to just like blow the whole thing? Like, live to run another day type of thing. But if you can, I think that he's probably worked with a sports psychologist and like has his mental skills training pretty dialed at this point. But anybody could also like reframe that situation and be like, okay, well, if I put my shoulder in my like vest at this angle and it doesn't hurt, then like technically I could keep running. So I think having the ability to like problem solve and like on the fly like that is a good way to manage those distractions as well.
Or Zach having appendicitis and still trying to run this week.
Yeah, I don't think he's lining up. I think he made the
Didn't.
yeah.
Dale pulled him out.
Oh,
He
okay.
got signed off by the doctor, but the race wouldn't let him.
Man.
I was about that. I just listened to his interview with Dylan like the other day or whatever, and I was like, what? But that's actually a really good example too, because what he went through, where it was like he was amped up for the race and then like found out he had to go into surgery and was like, oh nope, never mind, not doing it anymore. And then like was able, like his mindset must have changed like from so many extremes, because then he was like, oh, this is now just chill, and then he was like, oh, there's a glimmer of hope, like, okay, I'm back on to planning and figuring that I'm going to do this race. So that was really interesting too, because I was just like, I don't know, if I got into that mindset of like, nah, we're not doing the race anymore, then I'd kind of be like, I don't know if I could switch back into race mode.
Totally. Yeah, that was impressive that he was able to like adjust, like adapt so well back like a couple times. One thing too, I think, and Jacob, like you were at Black Canyon this year when they kept changing the start time, and we all had to adjust and like figure out like, oh,
Yeah.
now what are we gonna do for another hour? Like the gym
Yeah.
wasn't open, it was very cold, and it was like how like in those moments, it's really important to be able to like stay flexible and like kind of roll with it even when it really sucks. And that could be anything from like the changing time on a race start to like Andrew was in the Olympic Peninsula last week, and like hypothetically, like like what would have happened if you would have rolled up on a water spot that was dry. It's like those are the type of things where you're like, oh, do I run another 14 miles or do I backtrack 4 miles or do I bail or do I whatever? Like I think having
Or
like the flex.
the real example of my friend starting to like cramp up in a
Yeah.
very, very bad way when we were like 15 miles from the end trailhead. And you're like, oh shit, all right, is this like a real medical issue? And we don't have good evac options if it is.
Yeah. that's scary. Like just give them all your salt pills. That's not medical advice, by the way. That's but yeah, and I think too, like, so Jacob's getting ready for Leadville, which is really exciting. And I think that the interesting thing about that race is that it's at such high elevation, and that like while we're training for heat, we're training for elevation, we're doing everything right and everything that we can. There are still times at 10,000 feet where, you know, like it gets cold at night and it might start raining. It might like anything could happen, you know? And so it's like being mentally prepared for that, and then physically prepared too, with like a rain jacket and whatever that you might need, like first aid kit. All of those things coincide with mental training. So it's like physically being prepared to like take on the endeavor, but also like knowing that you can handle it and that you're capable and competent enough to like get through it is another like huge confidence booster for when things kind of go sideways.
Mhm.
And then one other thing too is that I think when it comes to building confidence, either for mental skills training or for like these big events, like all these trail runs, I think sort of asking yourself what needs to happen in the training, in the race, to make it feel like a success, like to walk away feeling proud of that. And then sort of like retroactively implementing that into your day to day and making sure that you can like hit small pieces of that as you like move towards your goals. And I think that that will also give you a better idea of like how to feel confident in training in like the day to day, instead of just like putting so much focus on the outcome of a race performance or a workout, because those are not the only things that like determine success or, you know, like a good job.
I was talking to Chris this week because he has Cascade Crest, and the confidence that comes from knowing you've been there before, like him doing Run Rabbit and being like, oh, I'm not as scared because I've gone that distance. So I know what it's going to feel like at this point or that point throughout.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's just it's I guess especially with Chris who I wish he was here right now, because that would be an interesting conversation to have with him, because he because he's doing Cascade Crest next week, and I think that I'm already excited for his like post-run recap, just because I think it's going to be like, no matter what happens, I think it's going to be an adventure and there's going to be a couple funny stories that happen. But knowing, like Natasha and Caitlin were saying earlier, like knowing that it's going to suck at some point, like it's not always going to be like, you know, rainbows barfing or unicorns barfing rainbows, and like puppies and butterflies, and like all of that is great, but I think being realistic about like the difficulty of the challenges we're sort of preparing ourselves for is really important, and being able to like sit in that discomfort. And, you know, like going back to Courtney Dauwalter, she talks a lot about her pain cave and how she's like making it bigger and like chipping away from the inside. I think that that's a really interesting visual to think about. Caitlin, what you got?
Sorry, getting myself unmuted. And I never want to interrupt, so I just raised my hand so I remember that I have a question. But like in regards to that, when things aren't perfect and like the conditions that you can't control, interesting enough, when it's like comes to like weather stuff, sometimes I'm usually just I kind of laugh at it. So that doesn't get into my head too much. But like for example, one thing that really gets into my head that's like an external factor is like if I don't get a good night's sleep or something, or I don't know, like I'm just getting over being sick, or like there's little things that I'm like, this isn't ideal. Sometimes I'll get into my head before I even start the run and just be like, this is going to be a bad run. This is like, so when I sometimes prepare too much, knowing that like something's not ideal, I guess what's your recommendation with that situation where again, like you want to be aware that things are not perfect, but you don't want to get too much into your head and like kind of pre-plan out your destiny.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, yes. Okay. So I think being able to like hold your goals and expectations for events in these situations, like holding them lightly, is a phrase that I've heard used and like fully agree with, and being able to adjust and adapt accordingly. So if you're, if you're going into a marathon and you didn't sleep well the night before, like you'll be fine, like realistically you will be fine. Like the most important night of sleep is 2 nights before, and even then like you can get 4 hours of sleep some nights and function perfectly the next day. Like it's just a lot of it has to do with like the amount of stress you're under, and then think in the context of like getting sick or other sort of setbacks before events, it's always a good idea. Like this is why I like having like an A plan, a B plan, a C plan, a get to the finish line at all costs and minus, getting injured plan. And just being able to like adjust accordingly. But like, I also understand that that's tough because the mental component of that is really important too. And just being able to show up for yourself and try to like get the best out of yourself on the day is like ultimately the goal, right? And sometimes we fall short of those goals, but in the falling short, I think that we gain a lot of insight for like what to do next time or how to problem solve in the moment. So it's like if you're running a marathon and you're at mile 18 and you just completely blow up, like the race could still be considered a success by not getting injured or by not DNFing, So I think in those moments, it sort of like depends. But if you're talking about sort of like talking yourself out of a good run or a good workout or a good race before it even happens, then I think we have to sort of like go back to why you're doing that. Cause there's like that could become the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like you're just self-sabotaging in a way. And I think like the things that we say about ourselves to ourselves specifically matters a lot, because we believe that. So if you wouldn't say it to a friend or a close family member, don't say it to yourself, and I don't know. Sometimes I think we all have to be like our own hype people. We're like, we have to have that like inner voice that like believes that we can do it and like wants to get curious enough to like show up for ourselves day after day and just see what happens. I don't know if I answered that question or if I just rambled.
No, I think just showing up for ourselves is good. But yeah, the self-talk going into it, I think I need to get a little bit better at. And it's like not always, but there's again sometimes sleep is a big thing for me. If I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm just like, well, this work's
Yeah.
gonna be bad. And sometimes I'm just kind of like, do I even still do the run? Is there any like, again, I get too much in my head of like, is there like a risk for injury if I'm not like recovered well, and just stuff like that. Again, just start ruminating.
Mm-hmm. I think if it's just one night of sleep that you like didn't get a great night of sleep or get enough hours, if it's one of those and you've got to work out the next day, you'll be okay. You're not going to put yourself at risk for injury. But if it's weeks of that, months of that in tandem with like under fueling and high stress, that's where we get into like the danger zone of being able to like, we should pull back on the running, we should skip that workout, push it to next week type of thing. But if it's just one night, maybe 2 nights, it's probably okay. Anything more than that, I think we start pushing and rearranging. What other questions do you guys have about mental skills? And like, have you been able to use any of what we've talked about on the calls, like in your day-to-day training? So Natasha, when you were on your bike trip, you mentioned using the mental skills training, especially in like relation to music. What else were you using out there? Because you guys rode like 1,000 miles a day, like watching your Strava. So
Yeah, I used a lot from the like mini workshop you did with me and a couple other people. I definitely use the music, which my partner also inspires me to do. He listens to music way more when we're riding, but also another part of the music, which Caitlin, I don't know if this is helpful, but one of my friends, every time I was telling them about my trip, they're like, it's okay to just rest on vacation, right? Like you don't have to do some big adventure. And so while I'm on this trip, I kept thinking about that. And I was like, but this is rest to me because like I don't need to make any decisions except to go. Like decisions are easier, life is easier. And then a lot of times I'm just riding my bike all day listening to music, and who doesn't want to do that? So that was part of it, is like I was reminding myself to enjoy vacation. It's like listen to music. I also use the technique you talked about of imagining your worst race scenario and how do you want to show up in that situation. And we had days that were either like, I'm so hot, I literally want to rip my shirt off, and I'm cranky, and the miles are way too long, and my butt hurts, and all the different things. And I would try to think of like, okay, how do I want to show up right now? What can I do to make this better? Which the easy answer is always jumping in water, which wasn't always available. But it was at one point. We were going through a town and we're like a mile away from our destination. And I saw a little space to jump in the water. And I told Dan, I was like, I need to get in. I need to get to a good place. And it instantly worked. And so I kept thinking about that. And then we also had these torrential downpours on days where we're trying to bike up to Logan Pass and Glacier National Park and we can't see anything and we're soaking wet. And it was kind of like the worst situation that you could think of for where we were, and just trying to think like, okay, what can we do in this, and how can I not be miserable and make this, how do I want to show up in this? So I used that quite a lot. And and then the water is always like I really appreciate when we talked about those values, and kind of one of mine was like playfulness or something like that, and jumping in water is one of them. And so I did that as often as possible. And the other one, which I'm really trying to figure out how to do this with my running, is I now have this really silly like Hawaiian shirt that I love cycling in. And it's like 5 sizes too big. It's not a technical shirt at all. My friend gave it to me. But when I wear it, like people are so much happier. I feel happier. It's like my party shirt. And I'll bike, 80 miles in it and feel better. So that was another thing where I knew it was going to be a tough day. It was like, it's got parrots on it. So I just call it my parrot shirt. I'm like, it's a parrot shirt day. So all of those, like, they really, really helped. And then there's always like gummy worms is kind of a go-to.
gummy worms always help. I love the idea of the party shirt though. I think that like when I see people mountain biking or like riding or doing anything in a party shirt, like I am in a better mood because I'm like, oh, like they're having fun. That's cool.
Yeah.
But I think to that point, like, and having like a lucky shirt or a lucky outfit is really interesting because like if I know that I have a really hard workout or a long run, like I will put on my favorite sports bra, my favorite socks, and it's not necessarily like a superstition. It's like I feel like I'm putting on a superhero costume, like a cape, where I'm like, oh, I know that I'm gonna feel strong, I'm gonna feel confident, I'm gonna feel good wearing this purple sports bra and these purple socks, like my weird 12-year-old self is just like so psyched because I'm wearing like purple everything. But it also like when you feel good, you perform well. So it's like having that confidence in either like something that you're wearing or whatever it is, it's like you're putting on a superhero costume.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. So I'm working on finding a parrot shirt equivalent for running because it would not be good for running, but hopefully find something.
Maybe that can be our singlet design costume, is just like, but like bowling shirts, like party run shirts.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah. I don't know. How are you sort of like mentally prepping for Leadville right now, Jacob?
Um, so a few things. I was thinking, like one of the things that I just kind of naturally have always done is visualization on my run. Um, so like in a hard workout, right? If I'm doing an interval or something, I think a lot about like sprinting to the finish, like trying to visualize myself like sprinting to the finish line. And that I find really helps me. It kind of takes me out of the moment and puts me into a different moment where like it's easier to push harder, right? Um, or I'll visualize myself on the course or running the race because I think it just makes it a lot more like bigger picture than, oh, I'm on just another training run. Um, what it's funny, you put doing Hope Pass into my training log for Saturday, and I was already planning on going out and doing
Oh,
Hope
good.
Pass.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah. Um, so I think one of the things to do on the mental skills is really getting out on the course and knowing like there's that long section from Half Pipe into Twin Lakes.
Hmm.
Or before where Albert is, where it's on that dirt road and it was really hot and really exposed. And I tried to run it a little bit later than where I thought I would be on the day. So it would be a little bit harder than what I thought it would be.
Mhm.
So that way it's like, if I'm there and I'm feeling like shit, it's like, well, you've already been here and felt bad.
Yeah.
You ran out of water in this section, so you'll be okay. Um, yeah. And then I was thinking earlier with the music, I paced my buddy Taylor at San Juan Solstice, and we were on the top of the last climb, and there's some people coming up behind us, and I could just really tell he was in a bad, like in a low spot. He's quiet, he's moving a little bit slower, and I just started playing Higher by Creed on my phone. And I didn't tell him what I was doing at all. And it's so interesting is he picked up the pace naturally.
To get
Like,
away from the music, or I'm just
uh,
that's
no, he
amazing.
loves
It
Creed.
is
It's
like such a clutch pacer move.
yeah. I think having a good pacer that's really in tune to how you're feeling is indispensable. But I could just tell he was down. And I was like, oh, this will be funny, like ironically, and see how it goes. And he
Yeah.
like naturally picked up the pace.
Oh my God. I love that. I think I saw I mean, Creed is a great way to do that too, because it's just like you can't take anything seriously when Creed is playing, or like Nickelback, you know. I think that either of those would just be like, oh yeah, this whole thing, this whole decision is really silly. But that last push up on at San Juan Solstice is like so cruel and unusual that I love that you decided to like have fun and like remind your friend to like smile and like laugh about something silly
Mhm.
because like putting things in perspective is really cool. And that's sort of like one of the conversations that you can have with like crew and pacers before a big event, It's like I joke about like when in doubt play Beyonce, but it's also like play Creed, play Nickelback, play something that's gonna like get me to not focus on the pain and like remind me that like we're doing this for fun and like we get to do this. No one's forcing us to the finish line. So like that was like such a pro move on your part.
I do it with Jocelyn all the time when we run, and she's like in a shit mood at the end, and I just play Trick Daddy. Let's go.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, I think for Leadville specifically, and like I guess any race, like the more time you can spend on the like race course or similar terrain, the better, because like you'll know that you can run fast on trail. Like doing workouts on trail, like your times might be slower, it might feel harder, but the reality is that you're going to be racing on that terrain. So getting used to it is like good physically, but also mentally, like you can handle it before you get to the before you get to that section of the race. with Leadville specifically, the tough thing about Leadville now is that you have to run the first 100K solo. Like you don't pick up a pacer until you're on your way back through Twin Lakes. So you're going up and over Hope Pass solo. And I think like when you're in training and you obviously like could do the training runs with friends, or Jocelyn or whoever's out there, there's probably gonna be a lot of runners out there. But making memories during the training and having fun during the training that you can pull back on during the race. Like when you're going up and over Hope during the actual race, you can like think back to being like, oh, like that one weekend that I came out here with my buddy and X, Y, and Z happened, or we counted 37 wildflowers, or we saw a bear, or whatever it is. Like we'll sort of pull you through those like lower, darker moments to get through that section. And I think that like that's definitely something that I try to focus on a lot in races. And in the last time I ran Hope Pass, I was with my best friend, and he was dragging, and I was like, what do I need to do? How can I help? Blah, blah, blah. And turns out like he had COVID and we just didn't know. And so it's like, oh man, remember that one time like Jeremy was dying? It's because he had COVID, and he's great. He's fine now. But we can laugh about it now. But it sucked in the moment, but being able to like put it in perspective in terms of like, oh, now this feels a lot easier. Like the next time we went up Hope Pass because neither of us were sick.
I think one of the things, especially with like training for these longer runs, is trying to fall in love with the training process.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it has like, we converted the back of our 4Runner into like kind of a little camper setup. So we go out, we're sleeping in the back of the car, and we're like making coffee in the morning in the mountains, and like trying to really fall in love with, because it sucks, right? Like I ran at 10 o'clock last night, and it was like, I would much rather be on the couch than out here. But like trying to fall in love with it, being like, oh, it's beautiful to run. I have Garden of the Gods like right behind my house where I can do this super easily. And really like making memories with people, like going out to Crested Butte and being able to run out there and be like, all right, this is more, because it's hard, especially when you're gone. Like I'm running 12, 14 hours a week. It's a lot of time by myself. So trying to like really fall in love with the process. Otherwise it just becomes such a burning, it's so easy to burn out.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And like, I think that's where core values and goals come into play, because like, I think your core values sort of determine like that best version of yourself, right? Or even maybe not even like the best version of yourself, but like your favorite version of yourself. Like you get to be that person. You get to choose to find that person and be that person when you're out in the mountains. You get to make coffee in the mornings. You get to wake up in the back of the 4Runner, surrounded by wildflowers and granite. Like how cool is that? Like how lucky are we to be able to choose to do these things? But I think that sort of visualizing that favorite version of yourself or that best version of yourself, and sort of like not rearranging your life, but living in alignment with that version of yourself is so cool, and is such a cool way to fall in love with the process, because you're falling in love with your life. And I think that like that is super neat. Like how are we so lucky to be able to like do these things for fun, and I don't know, it's like it's very cool, and reminds me that like being in alignment with your values will always lead to like falling in love with your life and the things that you decide to do and the activities you pursue and the goals you chase down. Like that's just such a cool way to think about it. So I love that, Jacob. That's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that was really, really helpful for me in that is sometimes I get too focused on the training and being like, oh, I need to hit this mileage. I need to get this run done. I need to make sure I'm like on point every day. And like, I think just remembering the process and like remembering the mountains, remembering why we're out on the trails, that's super helpful to me, Jacob. Like seriously, everything you just said was a really good reminder to me.
Yeah, same. That just like hit me right in the feels. Like that's at like that's everything. That's why we do what we do. And I think a lot of times when people talk about like what is your why, finding your why, remembering your why, like I'm gonna have to go like rewind this and like re-listen to what Jacob said exactly because like that's it. Like you nailed it. Just so cool. Thank you.
I gotta say, I hate that question from like the David Goggins camp. They're like, "What's your why?" It's like, I just like fucking running. Like, I don't know. But sometimes there is like with Leadville, there's a deeper, more significant why. But
Mhm.
yeah, I just had to complain. I hate that question so much.
Yeah. It's a tough question. And I think it can vary depending on like what situation you're in, you know, like my current situation is like I am with family for the rest of the summer. And as much as I like want to go and like be in the mountains and stuff, like one of my core values is family. And so when they question like, "Oh, you're leaving to run again?" I'm like, "This is what I need to like stabilize and like feel normal, right?" But like you have to like hold those boundaries because it's what makes you feel good so that you can like provide for others. Like you can't pour from an empty cup type of thing. But I think that like that is often my why for going out the door at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever it is, just to like stay like grounded in myself or in the moment. Because whether it's running or life or work or whatever facet, you know, it's important to sort of like know the core values and be able to find ways to like be in alignment.
Yeah, and I think to your point there too, I mean, it's about not getting too hyper focused on one attribute of your life either, which is what I fall into a lot. Like again, I'll get super focused on my training and then I'll like neglect like being with people because like you said, like you're like, oh well, I need to do this. But then like there's other times when it's like, oh, okay, I need to remember families so important and you want to value that time too. And same thing with friends. So I think it's remembering and again making that mental shift of like it's definitely a balance
Mhm.
and not over focusing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think sometimes too, it's like it's okay to ask yourself like, what do I need right now? Like what do I need in order to function or what do I need in order to like provide energy or support or XYZ, you know, and then being like giving yourself the grace and like compassion to like provide that for yourself. Like sometimes it's like I just need to get out the door for 5 minutes and just go walk with my dog or I just need to lay on the floor, you know. That helps a lot. But whatever it is and it's like Natasha, you can ask yourself that question in the middle of like a 70-mile bike ride, you know, when you're like getting hot, getting uncomfortable, getting grumpy. Like, what do I need right now? I need a body of water. I need to jump off a rock into a lake, you know, and being able to like gift yourself those things, whether it's like a lake or a gummy worm or whatever it is. Like, you know, I don't know, I think we ask a lot of ourselves and being able to like celebrate the small wins is really important and also like a good way to keep us motivated. I loved this call. This was like such a cool conversation.
I feel like revisiting this and reminders on the mental training is really helpful. I feel like we've been talking about it a lot, and my A race is for it's like over 2 months away, and I want to make sure to keep having these reminders. So yeah, maybe I need to do some sticky notes or something, but I could see kind of what Caitlin was saying as I'm getting like closer and bigger runs, kind of losing sight of these tools that are really helpful and important.
Yeah, sticky notes for the win. And also, I think at the end of the day, like I think it's important to remind ourselves that like we and like, especially during the race, you know, like, one thing that like, I think I've said to you, Jacob, a couple times is that like, you've worked so hard to get to where you are through the training. Like, you deserve to have a good race. You deserve to have a good day. You deserve to have a good training run. Like, these are things that we like, we work so hard that like, we deserve to enjoy them too, you know, and like, the purpose of training isn't to finish a race or hit a certain time. Like, the purpose is progress. Like, progress is the purpose. So I think that like, just reminding ourselves of that is always going to be really helpful. And I don't know, I think sometimes just taking it less seriously can make it more fun and like more sustainable in a lot of ways. Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions about mental training, skills training, visualization, any questions? Not, it doesn't have to be like around mental skills.
So initially on the call, and then you addressed it, like the first statement you made about like skill set training, that it's like very tailored, right? So
Mhm.
I guess my question was like, is there workouts to do? And then for you, you basically said it's like dependent on the person, right? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we can talk about this one-on-one too, like
Mhm.
with each of you guys, if you want to do that, like we can figure out, like I have your core values, and then based on your core values, we can figure out like what your confidence levels are and what ways we can like boost those, what your motivation levels are, what we can do to boost those. There's like a lot of different ways to individualize the mental skills to like benefit you first, instead of just like, here's what works for all of these people, or this is what research says. But like, at the end of the day, like, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. So we have to find what works for you.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. So next week the call will be canceled, or yeah, there's no call next week. And then the following week, we'll do just like a check-in with a team, whoever wants to pop in, just like chat through stuff. Kind of want to set up sort of like almost like an adult show and tell, like a runner show and tell, like bring something, talk about something, share something with the team that like you're proud of or excited about, that doesn't have to do with running. It can absolutely have something to do with running, but just like a cool way to like be humans together in the same space. And then the following week, we're going to talk to I'm not sure yet. They haven't confirmed yet. So I don't want to like say their name out loud, but we're going to talk to an expert in the field about something that I'm really excited about. So I'll have confirmation on that later next week, but the next 3 weeks should be pretty cool, minus the canceled call on next Friday. So, but I'll still send out a newsletter with everything next week. So yeah, sorry, I'm pretty rambly today. I feel like I need more coffee. But yeah, this was a really great conversation. Thank you guys so much for participating and joining. And if you have any other questions, or want to follow up afterwards, feel free, reach out, text, call, whatever you want to do. And then if you want to talk about mental skills stuff too, same thing, reach out, text, call, we'll figure something out. We can start working together. So cool. Well, I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope it's not too hot. I hope it's not too humid.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.